Good morning and welcome to the November 2023 board meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or MHRA as we prefer to call ourselves. My name's Graham Cook and I'm the interim co-chair of the MHRA alongside Mandy Calvert and Michael Whiteside, who are both here today. And my role is to lead us through today's agenda. For those who've not attended our board meetings before, I must start by reminding you that this is a board meeting held in public and not a board meeting. And it's also important to explain that the board is responsible for agreeing the strategic direction of the agency, maintaining high standards of corporate governance and scrutinising the performance of the MHRA. But it's also important to clarify that this board does not make regulatory decisions on any medicines or medical devices. And this is because regulatory decisions on individual medical products are made by ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care on the recommendation of MHRA officials. These are independent civil servants with additional independent advice from our expert advisory groups such as the Commission on Human Medicines. As far as today's meeting is concerned, I just want to make you aware that we will be recording the meeting and that we publish these videos on our website so that they're publicly available. And we want as many people as possible to be able to observe the board's processes. On that note, I'm pleased that we have 62 people registered to observe today, 42 members of the public or representative of patient groups, 11 from industry, 9 members of staff. And thank you all for joining and for those who've submitted questions. With introductions in mind, we'll go around the room and I'll just ask my colleagues to introduce themselves. Today, our CEO, June Rain, is needed at a meeting in London, so we'll be attending virtually this morning. So June, maybe if I could start with you and we'll go around the room.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name's June Rain and I'm the CEO at the MHRA.
Claire, can we...
Good morning, everyone. My name's Claire Harrison. I'm Chief Digital and Technology Officer at MHRA.
Good morning. I'm Mark Bainey. I'm the Chief Science and Innovation Officer.
Good morning. I'm Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Booth. I'm MHRA's Chief People Officer.
Good morning, everyone. Junaid Bajwa, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Alison Cave. I'm Chief Safety Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Glenn Wells, Chief Partnerships Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Raj Long, Non-Executive Director. Thanks.
Morning, I'm Rachel Wadsworth. I'm Director of Communications and Engagement.
Morning, I'm Carly McGurry. I'm Director of Governance at MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Natalie Richards. I'm the Head of the Executive Office here at the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Rose Braithwaite, Chief Finance Officer at MHRA.
Morning, Mercy Jessingham, Non-Executive Director.
Mandy Calvert, Non-Executive Director and Interim Co-Chair.
Good morning, Julian Beach, Interim Exec Director for Healthcare Quality and Access at the MHRA.
Good morning, my name is Michael Whitehouse and I'm also co-interim chair.
Good morning, my name is Haider Hussain and I'm a non-executive director.
Thank you. And we'll have two further people joining us for specific items this morning. So although this isn't a public meeting, we do have an opportunity for members of the public to provide questions to the board where they relate to items on the agenda. And when we finished our agenda items, we'll do this through the chat function and also have pre-submitted questions that will be read out. Members of the public should be aware that the board can't see comments in the chat function during the meeting, but the communications team can, and they can use that to identify questions related to the agenda for the public Q&A at the end. So if you do want to ask a question and haven't submitted it already, if it's related to the board paper, if it's not related to the board papers, please don't put it in the chat function, and you can use the Customer Experience Centre to do that. Please similarly do not make any personal or abusive comments in the chat function, as you will not get a response and you may be removed from the meeting. We don't tolerate any form of abuse or harassment towards our staff or board members by individual members of the public. So I think that's all the introductions. Is there anything else that we need to cover? Only one with one mic. Just if I could ask people when they're talking with the microphones just to lean in slightly to them. I think some people a little bit harder to hear, myself included. Okay. So in terms of absences. We have absences noted from Alison Strath in Scotland, Greg Chalmers in Scotland, Cathy Harrison in Northern Ireland. We should welcome Liz Booth formally as our new member of the board, first public board meeting. So thank you very much for attending. We should go through declarations of interest. I think we updated these at the last meeting. Are there any additions or changes to the declarations of interest as last published? If not, that's very helpful, and I don't think there's anything we need to be concerned about in terms of today's agenda items. So we'll move to the minutes of the last board held in public on the 19th of September. I don't hope people have had a chance to read the minutes. I don't know if there are any comments or clarifications from those minutes. I'm seeing some shaking of heads. There's 2 or 3 actions in there that I'll just touch on to see whether there's anything to say. I think Action 103, I think Glenn was to provide the board with a breakdown of PQs received in the last quarter. I don't know when that will come.
So I sent around the ones immediately following the last meeting, and then my team are working with Rosie's team to look at quarterly reporting, so we'll work on that and get it in this report.
Great, perfect. And then I think Rachel maybe will talk about this a bit later, but the plan to develop a reputation strategy for their index with reputation index measures. Is there anything you want to sort of update on that?
No, that work's well underway and will come to the board shortly.
Great. And then I think the other action is in relation to an update on clinical trials, which we have as an agenda item, which we'll come to later. Good. So if everyone's happy, we'll accept those as accurate minutes. Thank you. And then we'll just move to our action tracker. In terms of the items here, I think it's a much shorter action tracker than we've had before, so that's excellent. And there are some ones in red that are on the agenda today. So 99 is around patient involvement in internal audit that needs to be reviewed by PSEC. Carly, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
We are in the process of building Thank you. We are in the process of building PSEC engagement into the internal audit plan and taking the corporate risk register to PSEC for some of those specific discussions about the relevant risks. So we will pick up the patient involvement in audit as part of that piece of work.
Okay. And the next PSEC is in the diary, I think. February. Very good. Okay, so 101, I think, Mark, as we say, that's on the agenda today. 102, we have a plan to invite the Patient Safety Commissioner to a future meeting, Alison.
Yeah, this action's been taken forward now, so I think it can be closed off the action list.
Fantastic. And Glenn, I think we've touched on that. And then Rachel, I think we've also just touched on the reputational index. So I think unless anyone has anything further, I think those are the actions, which is great. In which case, I think it's over to you, June. So I think we have the standing item where we have a report from the CEO with the important highlights. As always, it's been an incredibly busy month, a very diverse set of outcomes. So over to you.
Well, thank you. It has indeed been a very busy time. And as ever, we can see very clearly that we're working as one agency with key themes enabling science, research and innovation, accelerating access and delivering for patients. On the science, research and innovation front, from the 1st of September, our commitment that all the clinical trials applications and amendments will be handled according to the statutory timeframes has been met. And that's a great achievement following all the work over the summer to eliminate the backlog of clinical trials. And in October, mid-October, the new notification scheme for low-risk trials was launched, and we'll be talking about this later this morning. As you are in the meeting room at South Mims, the UK Stem Cell Bank celebrated its 20th anniversary in this room last month with a really excellent scientific symposium with talks from some of the UK's top stem cell scientists. And it's really important to note the breadth of outreach of the bank. 25 different countries are receiving these stem cells for research and clinical applications. And in fact, over half of the stem cell lines requested last year are for clinical grade cells. So, of course, the symposium looked at what the future might look like for therapeutic uses in this cutting edge area. I'd like also to mention on the devices side, we ran an innovative devices access pathway public and patient information session. This is the IDAP pilot, and really important that patients will be involved, patient experts, to support the selection of new candidate devices that will go into the IDAP pilot. So a very busy area for science research and innovation. Turning to the enabling access, clearly our guidance on the new international recognition procedure is really attracting a lot of interest, not just how to apply, but what are the reference regulators and the evidence requirements that teams in HQA, Healthcare Quality and Access, will look at. Of course, it does lead to the consideration of what our unique selling point for innovation will be once the recognition procedure is bedded in. Back to the device work on innovative devices, we launched a regulatory sandbox called the AI Airlock for artificial intelligence, the way that we're going to be looking at addressing evidence for medical devices incorporating AI, so that we do get a body of evidence, as this is such a growth area, particularly for the National Health Service. A very important pipeline of new medicines, including tirzepatide for obesity, and of course the conditional approval of the gene therapy for sickle cell disease just recently, and also for transfusion-dependent beta thalassemia. So a very important step for the UK, authorising the first innovative gene editing product. This is the CRISPR technology. Most important of all, though, is our work for patients and the public for safe use of medicines, and the recommendations of the isotretinoin expert group were published, and really importantly backed up by important publications from the British Association of Dermatologists and the British Dermatological Nursing Group, all looking at strengthened safety measures. And last month, we also had the guidance on dispensing valproate, so every patient on valproate always gets the warnings with every dispensed prescription about the harms in pregnancy. So putting patients at the forefront here. So really, overall, I think the groundbreaking nature of the research, particularly as colleagues are at South Mims, is attracting international interest and funding. We're working importantly on these streamlined access pathways and putting patients first in our communications and in all our activities. But finally, Chair, I think it's testament to the efforts and commitment of our staff that we continue to deliver in this way. So I'll stop there and happy to take questions.
Thank you. And as I said, it's an extremely broad range of things again. Please, questions or comments for June. Junaid.
June, thank you very much. Again, really impressive set of work. I think I'd just call out the gene editing work as a world first. I mean, that is absolutely brilliant and commendable to the agency for really leading the world in many of these guises, including the work that I believe the agency is doing in AI. So brilliant commentary overall. The question I had actually, probably a bit more subtle, was just on the CPRD patient engagement event. And I was curious to understand how well that was attended and how diverse a group of people did we have from patient and public involvement perspective.
So maybe I'll get June to ask, and then Alison, maybe you want to come in.
Yes, again, we see this as really important because of the weight we put on using real world data and the data that patients are providing through their GPs for CPRD. And that was at the end of October. And particularly, I think, important now that we're moving to a trusted research environment, that patients are aware and involved in this move. But really, I think Alison's got the hands-on information you're asking for about the diversity of the population who attended.
So about 20 patients attended that. I'm actually not quite clear on the diversity, so I'll come back to you on that. So this is an annual thing that CPRD do in order to ensure that their processes are in line and meeting the expectations of patients. But I can come back to you on the exact diversity of those 20 patients.
Thank you.
Okay, useful point. Michael.
Excuse me, June, as ever, a very commendable paper reflecting all that the agency is doing. I would also pay tribute to the work that's been done in preparing the agency for international recognition. The question I've got a question and an ask. It's early days yet. This goes live in January. And had you given some thought to how you would keep the board assured that this was working as planned? Because it is a departure from what we've done in the past. The second point I've got is really a question. So we will be placing reliance on other regulators. We'll still be doing our own due diligence, but to a lesser extent. We will be requiring information, but we're not the only organisation in the NHS system that needs that information to form a decision. And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about how we are approaching information sharing across the wider system.
Should we take that one first in terms of information sharing in the system?
Yes, happy to do that. And colleagues led by Glenn Wells in Partnerships Group have a really quite advanced proposal, starting, of course, with the health technology side, NICE and the other health technology assessment bodies in the UK. But clearly, we've got to think about the evidence that we have for international recognition and how we have a dialogue, if necessary, with the other trusted regulators. So perhaps if Glenn jumps in to give the update that Michael's looking for.
Sure. Our information sharing, as Jean said, is quite mature now. We share operational data, and I'll unpack that in a second, with the HTA bodies routinely, and also now beginning the rest of the NHS bodies around the UK. Our operational data is really our timings and the products that come through. We do this based on consent, as the regulations require us to keep things confidential and not share unless we do have consent. So we approach companies, then we use that consent to give everybody a picture of what's coming down the pipeline. That's coupled to, of course, some other horizon scanning activities. So kind of a principle of what we know we share when it comes to what we see coming to us. I think we should be made clear we don't see it always at the earliest point. Other parts of the system see that. So it's a collaborative information sharing that we need, just not from us only. We're taking that, maturing that again into having a formal agreement across the UK, across the health sector to share information. So again, all consent based, but in more structure and more infrastructure. And then we'll move into technical information sharing, which again requires a bit more consent from companies, but will follow the same routes out from us where we hold it to partners. The way that helps international recognition is early warning, really, as we can possibly give anybody about the intentions of any one company to use recognition procedures for approvals. So it's all in place. It just has to be, it's manual at the moment. Ideally, it will become automated and supported by IT infrastructure in the future. But that's all, again, being planned and work closely with Claire's team and others around the agency and Mick on management systems. So we're doing it now. We're improving it through automation, and it will be broadly used, hopefully, through 2024.
Do you want to follow up on that? Yeah.
I am assured by all that you say. I don't think as a board we should lose sight of the ultimate objective of this, which is basically to get medicines to patients much more quickly than has happened in the past. And going forward, that's the assurance I think this board needs to get in some form.
Are there any thoughts about how the board might be kept up to date on this? And
I mean, it depends. The ultimate game, obviously, you're right, is to give timely access to patients to safe and effective products. Some of that time acceleration is with us, some of it isn't. So what we can do, I'm sure, working with the operational groups, is give operational data and timings, and we can tell you how fast and when we share data. But controlling the end-to-end patient access, obviously, we provide market access. But those metrics we can gather working with partners, I'm sure, and seek to create some kind of reporting around it. But the data we hold and the data we share, that's what we can tell you about when we do it. And we can obviously imply the impact of that if it is a shorter time frame to patient access.
Ada, do you want to come in on that? No, Raj, do you want?
I think it's very much in the same vein as what Michael was asking. Perhaps what would be useful for the board is to understand the what and the how as opposed to the actual data, because I think part of the reason why I think the question is coming up is because we've heard about the discussions, but we don't have any insight into how the process is. So even understanding the process without sharing any of the confidential information, I think would be a good way to keep the board. Just a periodic update, but kicking it off with this is what the process is in terms of, could help, I think. And then we can build on that as a board to see, as we progress. Just a suggestion there.
Yeah, and I think by the time we next have our full board, it'll be January. So it may be a good time. We can talk later, maybe whether that's a good time to review how things are working in that setting.
I can volunteer to send something around the board before then about what we do. If that would help.
I think that would. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. Yeah. And just to follow up, just on the sharing data question, I think I read somewhere that there needs to be some more work done with international partners in terms of sharing to us. Is that right? And what's the situation on that at the moment?
So the way recognition works, from our looking at early days through the policy and how we do it, essentially recognition is companies send you the assessments they have from trusted regulators. It is not a regulator-regulator conversation that we can find out anywhere. And that's down to resource, I think, restrictions that other regulators have. If they do it for us, they'll have to do it for everybody. And so the information we get comes via companies. So we need to decouple that notion. We're not going to go to other regulators at this point and say, can you tell us what you've done? That said, we have very good collaborative relationships with them and can always ask specific questions if we need to. It's just there's not, as I said, other countries that use recognition, there isn't a system in place where regulators routinely exchange information. There are things out there in the community that are being worked on in that space that are independent of us, but it's certainly not how it works at the moment.
Okay. Amanda. Sorry. Yeah, go on, Amanda.
I think it's a similar question I have, but it's sort of relating to clinical trials on the data that we have. In terms of, I think we've done an amazing job to get the backlogs assessed. I would like to understand better the impact that having those assessments has on the number of approvals for clinical trials and the impact that that's having on the number of trials that are now running in the UK, because that's it's our overall objective. So in terms of understanding the assessments, I get that we're doing that in statutory timelines, but has that had an impact on approvals of getting trials started?
So maybe we could come back to that because we've got a couple of sessions on performance and then trials. So maybe yeah.
And if we can just hold that, and then the other question I had was around Pangea, and again, we take part in this every year, and counterfeit medicines is a huge issue. I would like to get a bit of a sense of how big that number is. I think it was 600,000 medicines which were impounded, but is that a big number or a small number? And I've got so I think it would be really useful to put that into context to understand what the size of our impact is, or whether we need to do more or less.
Yeah, 600,000 doses, I think, so it depends how big the dose. Yeah, so who's best to comment on that?
It's hard to say what the actual denominator is. Obviously, the team are working very hard to try and to identify that and their intelligence. It's a large number of doses, which is excellent, but I think getting that denominator is extremely challenging. We continue to work on that, but I could maybe update the board at a later date on some of the activities of the Criminal Enforcement Unit.
I think that would be helpful. I think it's one of those things that we tend not to spend so much time thinking about, but it's clearly a really important part of the agency's work. So maybe we could think about how to build that in. Yeah, Mercy.
Thank you. I've got one comment and one question. So just my comment is on the WHO Expert Committee on Biological Standardisation. And really pleased to note that this really important work that that we do as the MHRA, and often people don't realise that the UK kind of is doing this work, which is about biological standards and reference reagents as well. So it's really good to note that once more WHO has accepted our proposals on updates on that. My question really goes to the electronic patient information in 2.8, and this is really good work and something that we really need to get ahead of in our digital age. And I was just wondering if it also covered patient information leaflets, as well. So what kind of patient information are they working on? Because obviously, I think we've discussed before how patients get hold of accessible information and understandable information as well. And this is kind of a really important kind of route to it. So yes, patient information leaflets, is it linked?
Who would like to comment? I don't know if Jean, you want to come in, or Julian? Yeah, Julian.
Linking, it was more about the electronic patient information leaflets. We are looking at that and working with industry quite closely to pull a pilot together in terms of how we're rolling out that both the accessibility of patient information, but then also the format of it. So those are ongoing right now, so that we have a clear plan, working with what is termed a steering group, is chaired with industry, and looking at bringing that forward over the next 6 months to 12 months, so that there are some barriers that we are overcoming, but we're also looking at running a trial into next year, a pilot, and that really is where we're looking at going with that.
Mercy, I can't remember if this is on the PSEC agenda going forward, but it feels like it should be something that we could...
It's not. I think we've discussed it in the past,
Yeah.
but it's not specifically on the agenda. So it would really be good, maybe on that timeline, you know, kind of within kind of the next 6 months or
yeah,
so.
I'd be keen to see it there, I think. Yeah.
Not more than happy to provide an update. And just while I've got the mic on, just coming back to the international recognition piece, we're also looking at, more than happy to bring an update on the process to see how we're operationalising that in the context of delivery of licence applications and those sorts of things. And one thing I just wanted to mention on that one as well is that the profile of applications, we are also working with companies to understand when they will submit, because that will also impact when patients will achieve access in the UK and which route that they choose. That is also a deciding factor with that one. So
really important.
drag it back. But
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Any other comments, questions from... Yeah, Hayden.
Thanks, Graham. And June, thank you, as always, for a really comprehensive and informative report. I just had a couple of call-outs that I thought were really, really interesting. I also noted the Operation Pangea and thought that was, continued really excellent work from the Criminal Enforcement Unit. I also think the work around polio vaccines was really, really good to hear about. There's been a resurgence of wild polio in Africa, so these things are very pertinent, and it's great to see the depth of knowledge and skills that the MHRA puts to good use. My question, well, it's really a request, was following up on the CPRD move to TREs. Perhaps we could have action around going a bit deeper into that, both understanding the diversity as Janed called out, but also the safe outputs. I was curious to understand what they actually look like and what was meant by that phrase.
This is a busy area, isn't it? So, Alison, do you want to comment on?
Yes, well, in terms of the trusted research environment, we're well underway with that, and we should be launching pilots for some clients next year. So happy to update the board on some of the activities there on the TRE. Obviously, it's a big change in how CPRD operates, so it is an important update, but it's absolutely the direction of travel, obviously, in terms of ensuring in the digital age patient safety and ensuring that patient data is as safe as it can possibly be. Having said that, of course, it is we've had multiple audits of the way CPRD manages patient safety, patient data, and it's always been completely it's always met all of the requirements of the audit. But this is a new direction of travel, and obviously aligns with the research environment that patient data in the whole is that's the direction of travel. But yeah, happy to bring an update at a later board.
So a very naive question from me, but I mean, at some point, presumably you can say this is a functional TRE and this is designated and operational. So at what point do you think that's going to happen?
That is in the next financial year, and where all the clients will be moving to.
24/5?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
It was more around the safe outputs and just understanding what that phrase actually meant and what they look like. But fine to take it offline.
It's around the confidentiality access requirements, and that is an annual requirement for approval that CPRD go through. So, yeah, I'm happy to bring an update in a later board.
Thanks,
okay.
Alice.
Great. Well, thank you, June. I think you've stimulated a lot of conversation. We'll pick some of that up in a minute. So I think there's some...
Before we go on,
yeah.
Can I just return to the question of international recognition?
Yes, please.
And Michael's point. And it really is a major shift. So it'd be absolutely appropriate for the board to have a stock take after the first, say, 4 to 6 months, maybe even sooner if things are working out in a way that we haven't predicted. I think we can predict a good balance between UK first national application and the use of reliance, and we're understanding a bit more how companies are making these decisions. But our commitment to delivering innovation by facilitated and rapid access remains, as we did with the gene therapy for sickle disease. So we've really got to keep a finger on this pulse to give the board assurance that we're not losing opportunities, we're striking the right balance. It's probably about 50-50 at the moment. I'd be interested in Julian's take on that. With some countries, it's been as much as 80%, 90% reliance. So I think we need to get that balance right so that the UK remains a very attractive ecosystem for developers to introduce innovative products.
Yeah, we've discussed a bit before what we think that balance should look like. Julian, do you want to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that given where we are now, that the change from reliance to recognition, the percentages we see are not in that kind of 80-20 reliance to national. They're more the other way around, 60-40, maybe even 70-30 at the moment, given the numbers of applications that we look through. There are obviously different segments. So in innovative medicines, we see a slightly higher proportion of medicines coming through with that recognition piece. And it's really looking at how do we track each of those different requirements so that we can make sure that we are both reaping the benefits of recognition to enable us to spend more time on the innovation side of things. So absolutely, I think overall the split will be something more to the 60-40%, and that's really where we see at the moment. But we don't see a major shift right now of total numbers coming in January, and that's not what our intelligence says. There is a lot of interest in how we do with certain markets because of orders of international filing practices, but then it's really looking at how do we configure from that. But as Glenn was iterating earlier, the processes of using unredacted reports remain, so that we will only be able to assess using unredacted reports.
Okay, so I think we've got a few actions we can take away. So Glenn, thank you for the offer of circulating something. I think that would be helpful. And then I think we need to have a mechanism early in the new year to see how things are going through board, and we can talk about that and how we do that, but probably January or February. And then I think there's been a couple of issues highlighted that we could think about for future boards, including enforcement and CPRD, CPRD is obviously a recurring item anyway, but enforcement may be something that we should have a look at. And Mercy picking up the question about patient information leaflets and PSEC can have a sooner look at that. That would be great. Okay, lovely. Thank you, June. So leave that on. Moving to our next item on the agenda, it's looking from Rose. I can't see, where's Rose? Oh, there you are. Okay. Welcome, Rose. Thank you. You're going to update us on the business plan targets and progress against them. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. I'll take the paper as read, but really the headlines are that at the half-year point, overall the agency is on track to deliver its business plan objectives for 23-24. Some areas at risk of slippage, but we have sound mitigations in place to bring them back on track to deliver this financial year. In terms of the key performance indicators, we've expanded these slightly to show a few more, and we're still working on developing a new set for later in the year, which will come back to the board, I think it's February. So really over to you for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I did read it and weigh it. So there's a lot of data here, which is great. Do people have specific bits they'd like to focus on? And clearly we can't. Yeah, Raj.
Thank you. Rose, great progress when I look at some of the items, particularly on the debt recovery, because that was a long outstanding item for the board. I have to say, a little bit curious on the CPRD income, because clearly the growth was a trajectory throughout the year. But then in May, it didn't. Was there a reason for it? Just more curiosity as to why that happened, and we can avoid it for the future. Thank you.
Rose or Alison want to answer? Yeah.
I'm happy to say it's just a phasing issue often in terms of when licenses come through and when new products come on board. There was a bit of a delay in launching one of the products, but we're very confident that we'll pick up and follow that trajectory through as indicated on the graph. So it's just a little bit of a phasing issue on the income.
Again, well done. I think it's nice, steady growth there. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Yeah, Mercy.
Just a comment. I noticed the health inequalities and the women's health thing.
So can you give us page numbers and then we can?
Yes, it's on slide. What number is this? Slide 35 in the pack. Page 35 in the pack. So I'm looking at 1.2.2. So the review of regulatory opportunities to address health inequalities. And I know that you're slightly off track. So it's really about assurance getting on track again by Q3 and Q4. So I know you're looking particularly at women's health in the next bit, as it were.
Who'd like to comment on that?
I think Alice. Chair, shall I take
yeah,
that?
please.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's been a slight delay, partly because of the redeployment to clinical trials. So that's a particular assessor. But we're back on track with the Q4 for the women's health inequalities. But we want to expand that more, and that's a bigger piece of work. And so the timescales of that will be assessed and brought forward. So the much bigger piece of work is around looking at devices and all of the inequalities that have come through in some of the Whitehead reports. And so we want to think about that more broadly. So that's a bigger piece of work than just the original aim, which was women's health.
And are you confident it will come back on track then?
Women's health, yes. Q4 next year. By Q4, yes.
Amanda.
Thanks again. I think this data is now something we can have good discussion about. So thanks to Rose and the team. A couple of questions. One is on ILAP and one is on staff training. I know they're quite different perspective. I noticed that we've had no ILAP approvals or innovation passport approvals in Q2. So if we could that's on page 40. And then my other comment...
So we do that first, because I think that sort of touches on the comment you made before. And as I understand it, ILAP has been paused. Is that what I read correctly?
Yes, we had to redeploy all medical assessors onto the clinical trials. So we haven't paused totally. We're still continuing to engage with applicants, and we're also working very hard on the refresh. But unfortunately, the medical assessment to do the innovation passports wasn't available.
So how are we managing that communication with people who are interested in the scheme?
Well, basically, we tend to receive about 3 to 5 applicants a month, so we can actually converse directly by communication.
And what is the message to them if they're interested?
Well, we're continuing to bring ILAP back onto track, and also to actually update it so that we'll explain new service in due course.
And do we have a date for bringing it back on track?
We're hoping to have that basically for next quarter, but it's active work now. We may be phasing what we bring in, but definitely the main issue at the moment is the ones stuck at the moment waiting for progress.
Amanda, do you want?
I think we need to be very clear in our communications out to maybe through industry bodies, and because if things are felt to go into a black hole, I think that will reputationally be potentially quite damaging. And also, I think we need to be transparent, and people will understand. but I don't think there's anything on the website that's saying, you know, your innovation passport application will be assessed in quarter one next year or anything like that. And I think that could lead to quite poor feedback from industry. So I think having that communication needs to be clearer.
Absolutely. Yes, we'll work on that, and I'm happy to bring this back to the board.
Yeah, I think particularly as we've seen the success of ILAP this week, right, and you know, there's clearly a role for it to be playing. Any other comments on ILAP? Otherwise, do you want to take your second question?
Okay, thanks, Graham. The second was on page 42, and it was around patient engagement training, and the comment that 89.4% of staff have undertaken that, which far exceeds the mandatory training run by other other courses in the agency. So are we saying that our mandatory training, less than 90% of people actually undertake it?
I'm looking at, yes, Liz.
We've made some quite good progress on mandatory training, but we've still got a way to go. Mandatory doesn't entirely mean mandatory in our organisation. Mandatory to me means 95% achievement. We are for many training courses in that kind of late 80s area. So I think there is work to do, both to monitor the mandatory training and to encourage colleagues to want to do it.
Can I pick that up? I mean, I'm very naive in these matters, but I work in NHS and a university, and mandatory is mandatory. So I don't get through my annual review unless I've done it. So should that not be how we do things here?
Yes, I think we need to move to ensure that mandatory actually means completely mandatory.
Yeah. So how can we do that?
It will be driven in part by our new learning management system, which will enable us to monitor people's achievement against their mandatory training objectives very easily, and follow up those colleagues who have not managed to undertake their mandatory training, and obviously find out why, because sometimes there is a reasonable reason. But ultimately, it's the usual combination, I'm afraid, Chair, of carrot and stick, as mandatory training is in the NHS. And when colleagues come to have their annual reviews, there needs to be a tick in that box.
Yeah. Do you want to comment?
Okay, I think the assurance we really want in terms of that, because that's really important for both for our staff and part of our culture as well.
Paul, do you want to comment on how much mandatory training you do, or you? So, did you want to come in?
No, it was a separate question. If we're able to move on to slide 54, so 26 of Rose's pack, and it's just some reflections on the granularity of the progress which is being made or isn't being made, because if I'm reading this correctly, we've still got applications which are out at 5 years with not sort of, it doesn't look as if things are really improving.
I'll just check we're looking at the right graph. So
54 performance, HQ&A, established medicines.
Yeah, so looking at the numbers that we are processing through those applications, and where we have got outstanding queries, we are working with companies to close those out, so that some applications have been through the cycle and we have had no response, or we have had limited response, so we are closing those out, and those are also included in the figures, so that where a decision is determined, and they will continue to go through, but we're giving companies the opportunity where the applications have been going through to either respond prior to that cancellation, or we are making decisions as we go through. So it's right to say that we're up to 5 years that we do have applications in the systems, which is why you're seeing the spread of graphs, because we are both reviewing more, but we're also clearing out those applications which have not been chased up for different reasons, and company priorities have changed, companies have gone out of business, so that there are a number of things that we are looking at to make sure that we have got only working on current license applications going through.
I wonder whether it is possible to sort of show that in a future graph, because it's sort of, that's quite helpful to understand as a group where the ball is in our court, And so understanding how well we are performing, and then the other group where the ball is in the company's court.
Absolutely. I mean, the way we manage it really is, and it's clock on, clock off time. It really, when the application is with us, the clock is definitely on. And that's where we start to see the numbers of how I'm going through the system increase. Not, but it could be the company, it could be that we need to be chasing it up, but we are actively going through that progress. But we can take that view of increasing the numbers or the granularity of what we report.
Yeah, just so we can get assurance that we are making progress on it, because if I just look at top level, it doesn't look great.
Yeah, I mean, it is slow progress, and as we see that we are determining more, we are bringing those through quicker, but it is also fair to say we are seeing more applications coming in, and we are seeing more light variations coming in as well. So we are working our way through that, but it is a longer game in terms of how we're clearing this, and being very much along the lines of we need to be growing our capability to go through these applications much more quickly. We also need to be chasing down requests for further information to enable a license to be granted, but providing that granularity to show the progress we're making. Absolutely.
And do you have the resource to do that?
We are building that resource. So we've come from a place where we've had limited resources in terms of training because of staff turnover, and looking at that, and that's something that we are actively building. So earlier in the year, you will remember that we had numbers of assessors that we are recruiting. We continue to recruit medical and pharmaceutical assessing resource right now, so that those are ongoing, but they do take time to train. So in some cases up to 2 years. So there is a long period to get people up to a fully competent assessor criteria. We are bringing in further resources as we speak at the moment to look at some of the more operational side of things, to look at following up with companies, maybe not doing the assessment, but doing the follow-ups to ensure that we are moving things through as quickly as we can do, so that where there is less technical training to be requiring to be done, we are also increasing that as well. So we are getting to that point where we have sufficient resources. We have not had sufficient resources for a period of time, and then we're taking that forward and moving that where we are now.
Okay, thank you.
Hader first, and then.
Thanks, Graham. Firstly, congrats to Alison for being the most prolific speaker of the last quarter. That was a great stat. My question's around page 65 on the incidents regarding people, and the graph jumped out at me because it seemed to be increasing fairly significantly. How concerned should we be with those figures? I'm not sure who would be the right person to. Is that Liz?
Does anyone want to pick that up? Yeah.
I mean, I'm not fully involved in terms of some of the collection of these figures, but for me, the fact that we have figures is something to be absolutely commended. That the growth of reporting, the growth of others, so that we are making sure that we've got things fully investigated. So,
Absolutely. This is something we'll come back to in the health and safety strategy. But there aren't any accidents, for instance, here which haven't been reported and handled fully. And we're actually really seeing now great engagement through health and safety champions and other mechanisms, so we're getting a true picture of what's going on. So yes, we will continue to absolutely monitor this, deal with anything from the reports on the accidents, so we can get best practice. And I would like to see a plateau, I'd like to see us getting the reports in, but absolutely dealing with it so that we're not missing anything.
So the increase is partially a reflection of greater engagement and reporting?
Yes, we believe so.
That's great.
There's nothing in the incident reports, there's no trends, but do feel free to raise that with Marie when we get to the health and safety paper.
Thank you.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Michael, do you have a last question?
Yeah, thank you. A very quick question. It's really on slides 40, 41, and all credit to the work that Claire and her team are doing in resolving incidents. But I was just interested in your professional view about, are we still okay in terms of the resilience of our digital systems within the organisation? We've got a lot of replacement going forward. Are you confident that that's still manageable with your resources?
In terms of team size and...
Yeah, really the whole, the digital platforms can deliver what our people need to actually deliver their business objectives.
Yeah, I'm doing everything I can to ensure that. So prioritising work as well. So although we're doing a lot, still doing less than we had originally planned, so we can really focus a lot around recruitment, a lot around training, and a lot more collaboration across the business as well. So every kind of thing that I can tweak in small or big ways, doing that, and the focus really is on three main things: legacy, eradicating legacy; innovation, which is linked and in small ways, so the technology that we have already, innovating with that to recognise opportunities and challenges and address those with existing technology. But at the other end of the spectrum, looking at things such as AI, the dangers that they present within the agency, but also the opportunities as well, to help mitigate. And then the other one is around safety in terms of information security and cyber. So as you know, lots going on in that space. Not just within MHRA, collaborating with NCSC, NHS England, and really conforming to the frameworks and standards that are in place. And finally, ensuring organisations within our supply chain also conform to those. So I'm doing a lot more work with colleagues across the business when we're procuring technology and suppliers, that too is all aligned as well. So lots going on.
Okay. I think in the interest of time, we probably won't go any further. But Rose, thank you very much. I mean, it's a very comprehensive set of data, which I think is going to continue to evolve, I guess. But I think it's very helpful for people to be able to dive into that. Just a couple of comments. I think from the trials point of view, we'll come on to trials in a minute. I still find the kind of data we're getting, sort of slides 47, 48, not that helpful in understanding the performance of trials. And maybe we could pick up on that next time this comes back. If we could sort of align that a bit more to what the trials teams are developing, that would be quite helpful. Just one, and then we've got a few small points that we can pick up on, well, some small, some larger, but also some very strong positive things we heard about the debt recovery. I think one thing I just wanted to highlight as a positive thing, the one figure that stood out for me was on page 64, which is voluntary turnover annualized, which I'm going to take out for a slide deck, but it just shows how that's fallen to 9% from 23%, which I think which is great, and I think that sort of reflects in how the agency can start to deliver what it needs to be delivering more effectively. So that's fantastic. Great. Any final comments? Otherwise, I think we'll move on. Thank you. If I get my agenda. So I think the next is trials, as we say. So this is the planned update, Mark, from yourself. And I think, do we have James dialing in as well? Should we just wait for James? Are you there, James?
Yep, I'm here. I don't know. Hopefully you can hear and see me, perhaps.
We can see you now. Yeah, lovely. Thank you. I'll let Mark introduce and then over to you, perhaps.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we've, of course, had the backlog on clinical trials, and as June said very clearly, we've cleared the backlog. We have an outstanding action to inform the board regularly of all the steps we're taking to avoid it happening again, but also to actually improve our service thoroughly in all aspects, to update our services so that they are some of the best in the world in terms of regulation of clinical trials, and to make sure they're internationally equivalent so that international trials can be hosted in the UK as effectively as possible. So a lot of work being done by the team, a lot of points, but I'll hand over to James.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good morning to members of the board. So the paper you will have received covers an update on performance. The measures we will maintain in place to assure continued performance of clinical trial assessment, and then a look forward to the plans around the future operating model for clinical trials within the MHRA. As Mark and June already touched on, the backlog has been completely eliminated. There is nothing before the 1st of September 2023 that is overdue. And for all applications that were compliant that have been received since the 1st of September 2023, all have been processed well within statutory timeframes. You will see in the paper there are a series of graphs presented, 4 graphs, which are extracted from our monthly metrics, which were published last week for the preceding month. And you'll see from those that we are well within statutory timeframes. So looking at the 2nd, 3rd and 4th graph, you'll see for initials we were at 22 days versus 30. For amendments, we were at 19 versus 35. So that's on average since the 1st of September. If you look at the first graph, you'll see that we've been fairly consistent over September, October for initials. A slight increase for the amendments timeframe, but still well within the 35-day statutory timeframe. And that was driven by some of our work to really refocus on making sure some of those pre-1st of September applications, a very small number, but a number that did exist, were eliminated. So the key message, backlogs eliminated, performance well within statutory timeframes for clinical trials. We'll be retaining some of the support we put in place to assure continued performance. That includes up to the end of the year redeployed resource from within the agency, a small residual amount, but also when necessary and supportive use of contractors, as well as maintaining the unique partnership developed with colleagues at MHRA, providing access to their clinical experts where relevant to support the assessment decisions of our own assessors. If I then focus on the rest of the paper, which talks about our future plans, so there have been a number of workshops and deep dives both internally and externally, and these are considering the future operating model in terms of the regulatory model and the resources required to deliver that, the legislative model and the work to ensure that the new regulations are in place by the end of Q4 for this financial year, the future fees and cost model, the digital and infrastructure requirements to support that future operating model, as well as the long-term communications. Those workshops have been taking place over November and will continue through the end of this month, and then that will culminate in the preparation of the final implementation plan in December for the future operating model, and we can bring that to the board in the beginning of next year. We're also making sure we maintain the engagement with our external stakeholders, and a couple of weeks ago there was an external workshop with a range of stakeholders from other government bodies, industry and academia, and that was to seek their input on those revised proposals. That included discussion around the concepts of a life cycle model for clinical trials, the use of notification schemes, for example, increased use of notification schemes potentially for clinical trial amendments, so amendment to the original application, as well as the use of regulatory science to support some elements of our future operating model. For example, being able to promote and produce regulatory thought pieces around topics such as decentralized trials or important areas such as diversity and inclusion in clinical trials. So those strands will be brought together in December in that final proposal around the future operating model. And those will then be brought to the board early next year. Hopefully that has been a useful update, and I'd be more than happy to take any questions the board members may have.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of useful information in there. Please, comments or questions? Yeah.
Can I come back with
you
my
can.
question?
You can come now.
Hi, James. Thank you, and an amazing effort to eliminate those backlogs, and I think that's a great achievement. I suppose my question is a little bit more thinking about whether how many trials have been approved to start compared to previously. I suppose my slightly cynical hats have said, well, you could just give lots of GNAs and you could assess them with the timelines, but we don't actually have that impact then on getting trials started and the impact on public health. And I know that's quite a cynical view, but I think it's really important we understand how we relate our activities to the impact it has on life sciences in this country. So I'd really like to understand that. Firstly, and also understand the controls we're putting in place to support the decisions we make.
Okay, so 2 questions, I guess. Should we take the first one first?
Sure. So I can come in on that one. In terms of numbers of approval, so looking at the kind of input and output, those figures are stable within the averages that we've seen over the last few years. So you'd have heard me previously refer to an average of around 17 initials and about 106 amendments a month. There is fluctuation around that, but there's nothing which is significantly outside of what we would expect. In terms of the GNA point, in the graphs, you'll see that we also measure the second review, and that talks around a 16-day target. Actually, we're hitting 8 days on that. So certainly a time frame for. Did I break up then?
Yeah, just chopping a bit. I don't know if it's you or us, but do you want to put? Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah, thanks.
I might repeat my answer then. So that second point that are presented. So if you look at the third graph that's presented since the 1st of September versus the 16-day target frame. So we're very much not just focusing on first review, we're focusing on the overall approval. Now, you'll recall that the overall trial approval also requires the approval from ethics, which is undertaken through MHRA. But if you take the combination of our average timeframes for both first and second review, so 22 and 16, that's still well within the overarching 60-day ambition taken alongside ethics review. That's the ambition set out in the O'Shaughnessy review. Furthermore to that, we are very conscious of the need to make sure that the raising of grounds for non-approval, the GNAs, is proportionate. And as part of the work on the future operating model, we are examining the criteria around those GNAs and ensuring that they are proportionate, clearly focused on ensuring patient safety, but also ensuring that they're relevant to the objectives of the assessment that we're undertaking. So hopefully that answers that first question, Chair.
Yeah, can you remind us of the second question?
Yeah, you've got it.
Yes, James,
yes, it was about the. No, I think that's really helpful, James. I think in terms of particularly that looking at the grounds for non-approval to make sure we're sort of brought into line with other regulators.
Yeah.
I think that's very positive. I think the other question was the controls that are now in place, and that's actually one of the key ones for the process to ensure the quality of our decisions is very transparent to the outside world.
Do you want to comment on that, just in terms of assurance on the processes as well, I guess?
Absolutely. So paramount to underpinning the assessment activity of the agency is ensuring the quality, and that's underpinned by the training of our staff as well as the control measures around that. So certainly where we have any challenging or concerns around the assessment process, there's a triage and escalation process up to senior staff in the agency. And as you've seen in the data and metrics we're reporting, there's complete transparency around the performance of the agency around the target timeframes we have. So we certainly support there and oversight of the assessment decisions and ensuring the consistency of those. I think to the point related to GNAs is that wider one around the criteria that we use and ensuring it's proportionate, and very much to Amandi's point, that we are not inconsistent with the wider global picture when it comes to the assessment of clinical trials, ensuring consistency internationally, in particular where we're considering multinational global trials, for example.
Thank you. Paul? Sorry. Raj and Paul.
Thanks, Chair. So, James, I would say congratulations. It was fantastic work here, given what we had even 3 months ago in terms of what we had to get through. So really kudos to the team to get us to where we are. My question is a little bit more futuristic in the sense that we were very reactive to this problem. The problem accrued, and then we came in to deal with it. What measures or controls are in place that we don't get back to this state in the future months, so that we have a sustained process and mechanism as well as foreseen resources for this, so that we are in control both of our clinical trials as well as other processes. And one of the reasons why I'm asking that is we heard earlier that ILAP was impacted because of the transfer, because of the need to get assessors there. So if we're having cross impact, should we do two things here? Question is, one, for the clinical trials sustainability plan to come back and say, what did we learn from here? What will we put in place permanently, and what will we look out for as we go? So a really integrated tracking system, or alert system, as you would call it. But in addition to it, what is the cross impact here, and how do we mitigate that for the future, so that as a holistic agency, we deliver on all the core business components of what the system expects from the agency?
Yeah, two really important questions. James, and then maybe others want to come in on that.
So I can come in. First off, I start on the point around control. So what we've put in place is, compared to where we were back, say, in June or July, is we put in place some very careful performance monitoring measures. So that involves tracking all of the applications coming in, so we can see the volume that's coming towards the agency, but also tracking them through the assessment process. There is a twice weekly review that occurs of that, where we escalate any that we think have any issues or concerns, and we do that on a kind of RAG status, so red, amber, green on those applications. We do that across both initials and amendments. And then we escalate as necessary. So we're being very careful to track what's coming in and its progress through the assessment process, making sure that everything is being completed well within the statutory timeframes. More widely, that's then informing the need to maintain some of the additional measures we put in place. So, for example, where we've retained some residual redeployment of staff, or the use of contracted support. So I can really try and give the board my absolute assurance that we have a very close level of monitoring of the assessment performance on clinical trials. And that means there is no possibility that we are going to have a situation develop, as did previously, of significant number of applications going overdue. We are absolutely committed to being within statutory timeframes, and our measures that are in place and our monitoring that is in place gives us confidence that is and will continue to be the case.
So maybe if I could just, a couple of things. I mean, to echo Raj's comment about the positives here, I think there's a lot to be congratulating you and the team for. Very minor point about the data here. It would just be very helpful just to be sure that there were none going over statutory limits. You show the means. I'm assuming the number over statutory limits is 0, but it would be just helpful to show that. And in relation, I think, goes back to the previous point about the board report and touches on what Raj is saying. I think this kind of data coming periodically will give us the assurance that things aren't slipping. I think that would be helpful. And I suppose just to build on the question, given that the averages are pretty good, is it worth, or have you considered redeploying people back sooner than you thought, given these issues of knock-on?
So to answer your first point, I can give the board absolute assurance that nothing has overgone statutory timeframes, and if it would improve the data, we can certainly include that measure, and we're certainly happy to work on the data that's presented and shared with the board on a periodic basis to make sure that you're kept informed of performance in this area. In terms of redeployment of staff, you recall that we earlier back at the beginning of September returned a significant number of staff back to their redeployed areas, and there's only been a residual amount retained post them. We are keeping that under very careful review, and that number is very small relative to the number that were initially redeployed, and as soon as it is feasible to return them, we will. I'm also very conscious of that we will be extremely careful about making sure that we only return those resources when we are able to ensure the continued performance on clinical trials. There is a significant amount of recruitment ongoing, and just as I joined the call, I think Julian was talking through recruitment into HQA. In terms of clinical trials team, 2 new medics will be joining within the next couple of weeks, and there's additional recruitment ongoing for medics, but also non-clinical and pharmaceutical assessors. As others will have mentioned, there is a period of time that it takes to train. However, I think one of the advantages of some of the permanent process changes we've made in clinical trials, for example, the change to a more risk proportionate level of assessment, depending on the risk and complexity and phase of the trial, which has been put in place, means that we can bring in some of those newer staff to work on the lower complexity, lower risk trials earlier on would have been the case historically, and then use that as a way of gradually building their capability. So I think a lot of the lessons learned from the clinical trials work over the past few months is something that enables us to onboard those resources much more quickly than we would have historically, and as we did do for redeployed assessors during the last few months.
That's helpful, thank you. Mark, you want to?
James has given a very comprehensive answer, but I just add an earlier point, which was an earlier action on me, which is around the training. We've totally revised the training that we give our assessors on clinical trials and made it transferable, including using it for MHRA clinicians. So in addition to our own resource, we've now got that safety net of a close collaboration with the Faculty for Pharmaceutical Medicine and with MHRA. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that if we have to move people again, we can train them much faster and we can use externals if absolutely necessary.
And how big is that pool now of externals from pharmaceutical?
James probably help. I believe we trained up to about 60.
It's in double figures. I think the work with NIHR is something that we are working with them to build into the longer term plan. So obviously during the summer period, we were getting support from NIHR's clinical network to support our clinical assessors in their assessment decisions. Important to emphasise that the decision was always undertaken by MHRA clinical assessors. I think in the longer term, what we're working together is to say, is that a resource that we can use in the future? Not necessarily to do that direct assessment support, but where we have perhaps specific questions around the speciality, so perhaps a specific oncology speciality or cardiology or another area, where getting access to some of that frontline expertise would also augment the assessment work that the agency undertakes. So I think the NHR collaboration is something that was very useful during the summer, and I think something we want to evolve in the future, because I think for the feedback we've received from those involved, from that clinical network as well as NIHR itself, that everyone has found that an incredibly useful enterprise and something that's built understanding and knowledge across the sector, and something we don't want to drop off as we move away from the work over the summer.
Yeah, and presumably the NIHR contributors are not necessarily NIHR employees. This is NIHR brokering between NHS and universities and so forth.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
it does sound like there's a lot of room for growth there. Yeah. So did you want to come in, Julian? I thought no. Michael.
Thanks, James, for the work. I was interested in paragraph 5.23, where you talk about the new cost and fees model, and given that costs have not really changed, fees have not really changed, I think there's a real issue, and forgive me, I don't know the market well enough, but that the UK remains competitive. We've put a lot of resource into this. You're moving towards a new operating model. There are a lot of variables there that could impact on cost, how we manage that process and realise the expectations of industry so that we are competitive. Is that going to be a challenge for you?
So I'll answer in terms of what we're doing, and then the question in terms of do we think that's a challenge. So those internal workshops have been looking at modelling some of that work, so understanding what the actual cost to deliver the future service is versus what the existing fees are. And you're quite correct in when you say that those fees have been the same for some time, and there is certainly an imbalance between what those fees are in some cases and the potential cost to deliver the existing service. We'll be making sure that through our existing and ongoing engagement, and I referenced an external workshop that happened a couple of weeks ago, that we'll be testing the development of that model, including any of the elements around fees with those stakeholders. And obviously, as a statutory fee, it will be subject to the formal consultation process, which will be part and parcel of the wider work by colleagues in finance. I do agree with you that we have to be cognizant of the fact it's not only the cost to deliver the service, but also the wider UK ambitions in clinical trials and the international environment. We know that there is competition potentially for where trials end up going, be they national or multinational trials, and that's important that we consider the balance between those two factors in the development of that. Certainly when we are consolidating the output of those internal and external workshops in December, that'll be something that we'll bring through in that paper in terms of what those future proposals would be around the fees and how that relates to the cost model for clinical trials at MHRA.
Rose, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yes, my team's working closely with James on that cost model, and the fees will need to change. I think at the moment they are very low. They did go up by 10% as part of the uplift in April of this year, but they're one of the areas we're focusing on that they don't reflect the true cost of the service.
And my naivety again, but I mean, I'm amazed that these aren't index linked in some way. So there's no, this is just a general problem, is it?
So our fees, because they
Sorry, there's lots of
require
sighs from people who know what they're talking about.
secondary legislation, yes, we have to directly link them to cost as well as part of managing public monies.
Yeah.
So we need the cost model first for the new structure in clinical trials, and then we will know what the fees should be.
Forward project.
Yeah.
Raj.
Thank you. Just coming back to the second question I had is the wider impact to the agency, the impact to ILAP, for example. We don't need to discuss it, Chair, but I think we need to table it for the agency to have a look and see where are these cross impacts, because it's great to get the assurance that on the clinical trials that will be sustained in terms of meeting statutory timelines and all of the activities. But we don't want any unintended outcomes. While we manage sustainability on one side of the agency, there are any unintended outcomes in the other side. So it'd be good to have that action tabled and come back and say, it's only ILAP that was, for example, that was impacted while we did this. And if that was the case, here's the steps we would take. Or if anything else was impacted, it'll be good to have that transparency for the board. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's an open question. I mean, the good thing is in the data we saw, we could see that ILAP is impacted.
Yes,
so
yes.
that should be a positive.
Yeah.
We would be helpful to have a date when it's going to restart. But are there other things people think as a board we should be aware of that we're not? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as we said in the last board, because of the transfer of medics from HQ&A, that has impacted the assessments of new and established medicines. So we are mitigating that as far as we can do. But there has been a significant impact because of the numbers of applications that we have coming in and the numbers that we have going forward. But I'm happy to provide to the board an impact of that. And we indeed are working through to understand how else we can be using the methodology that James has put in place for clinical trials, but equally some of the process steps that we were changing and how we can continue to work on that. And it is a focus of the EXCO meetings as well to ensure that we are clearly controlling that, but then looking at how do we plan and target to come out and deliver, especially for the established medicines backlog. That's where I see personally from the HQ&A perspective one of the biggest and highest risks that we have.
That's helpful. I think we've touched on that, but it's useful to emphasise that. Paul.
On the infrastructure side, so 5.2.4, is there a potential to share facility with HRA?
So you're talking about sort of digital infrastructure.
Sorry, given it sort of says that it needs a substantial investment, and we've got combined ways of working.
Yeah.
How much overlap, and is do we need separate systems?
Maybe James and Claire might want to come in.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll probably be aware that we have the IRS system where applications come in, and that's hosted by MHRA. Then we have our own case management system, Appian, within MHRA, and there's interaction between those systems. And the O'Shaughnessy report recommendations clearly set out the importance of combined review and the interaction between HRA for ethics review and MHRA for regulatory review. So we've certainly been engaging very closely with HRA in the development of our future plans, and they were attendees at the external workshop we held with stakeholders from across the sector several weeks ago. So I think that will be an important component as we go forward, the close relationship between HRA and MHRA in developing and improving those systems. Certainly where if I was a sponsor, I'd want to understand the progress of those trials through the various state self-assessments. So Claire, I'm sure, can add on this because I know our technology colleagues work very closely with their equivalents in HRA too.
So Mark's keen to come in, and then Claire maybe.
I had a meeting yesterday with HRA, Paul, where we're looking at this. We have nominated individuals who are deep experts in the processes to support Claire's team on filling out the process. HRA will be reporting this as part of their O'Shaughnessy recommendations, and we'll be certainly happy to provide data. It's the start of a project. We will update the board as the project goes on because it's not a short-term project they're planning. It's quite a fundamental change.
Yeah, so just to add to that, you hear me talk about now, next and later. So digital and technology team have been working with colleagues across MHRA and HRA and beyond on what we can do now. So whether it's notification schemes, getting better with reporting and our existing technologies, just to really optimise that. And then the next and later goes right through to O'Shaughnessy recommendations and so on, and all the players in the system. So we look at not just the tin and wire and the infrastructure, normally cloud anyway, not tin and wire, but the end-to-end service design. So every platform and application and service that we create, it's with the principles of frictionless technology. So from a user perspective, they won't know if they're part of an MHRA system or HRA. So it is working really closely with colleagues within the organisation and across the organisation to understand that end-to-end, top-to-bottom service design, and then make sure we have the digital and technology in place to accommodate that.
And do we have a sense of the timelines on this?
So the now, some of it's is being done, so that's all around sort of days and weeks, and then it's over the next couple of months. We're starting to, we're recruiting, we're adding extra resource and extra people and extra money to expedite this work. That's from my area, so that's all been really ramped up in the next couple of weeks. And then we start prototyping, so then users, customers can see what we have, and we evolve the technology, whatever that is, to accommodate those different user and business needs. So it's ramping up significantly in the next couple of weeks and months.
James, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, sure. I was just going to add to Claire's point that I referred to those workshops, and actually one this week is occurring, which is very much focused on those technology elements. So in that plan that we're developing, which will be ready in December, which consolidates all of the outputs of those workshops and what the future operating model is, that will incorporate the digital and tech elements that Claire's referring to, and that will set out further those detailed timeframes. And that's something, as I said, we can bring to the board in the beginning of the next year.
So it seems very encouraging that from a user perspective, there's a sort of a seamless pathway that we're working towards, but it's whether from an underlying infrastructure, we're not having unnecessary duplication.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we mean when we look at the end-to-end service design. So what's done by us, what's done by HRA, and then ensuring that there is no duplication and reusing, if it's applicable and appropriate, components, or if we have to buy and sometimes build components. Again, we're doing that across the piece with HRA, and I have regular meetings with my counterpart there, and one on Friday as well. And it's a top priority.
Great, no,
needless
that's
to say.
excellent. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any final comment? So again, thank you both for the paper. I think there's a lot in there, and it's a lot of positives in there, and I think seeing that data is very assuring for us. So it sounds like there's something you probably will bring back to us with the new ways of working for some of these other parts of the approval process in the new year. Is that right?
Yes, we'll bring that in the new year.
Do you have a sense of when you want to do that for the board?
So I would suggest that we look at January, potentially subject to obviously internal clearance. I'll defer to June and Mark on that. But I would suggest
okay, we don't. Yeah, but that's helpful. We can come back to it later, just to get a guidance. And then I think there's a piece of work sort of building on Raj's suggestion about what we need to see in terms of the knock-on effects and how we do that. But again, in the new year, I think that would be very helpful. Great. I think those were the main things that I've got here. Anything else I haven't captured that people feel we should be taking away as an action? Lovely. Thank you. Thank you both. And we'll let you go, James, wherever you may be.
Thank you very much.
Great. Okay. So our next item, welcome Liz again. So you're going to introduce to us the people strategy. How is the people strategy helping the agency become a great place to work and a place where people can flourish? That's a good start.
Thank you very much, and yes, and thank you very much for this and for inviting this item. My colleagues have done the work on the people strategy and the documents before you, and I obviously wholly endorse them. I'll take the paper as read, if I may, and I just want to make a few points about some of the the good bits and the challenges within the strategy. So the original strategy adopted in December 22, it was refreshed and relaunched as enabling people to flourish in July 23, and obviously runs alongside our corporate strategy. And as June says in the introduction to the strategy, it's a strategy for all of us. It's not just a strategy for HR. And it has that simple aim there to make the MHRA a great place to work. But of course, being a great place to work is not an end in itself. We know that having a highly motivated, highly valued workforce and inspirational leadership will drive productivity and performance, and this in turn will lead to better outcomes for patients. So this strategy sits alongside some fairly detailed delivery plans for cultural change, for equalities, diversity and inclusion, for example. And we're currently mapping those plans together to form a single accountability plan. And that's important to me because we'll use it to monitor our progress and as a stimulus to update the strategy and the strategic objectives, because a people strategy, as much as any other strategic document, has to be a living document. So we see 5 overarching objectives, and I'm going to say a couple of words about each one, if I may, before asking for your views. And the first is attracting and retaining the best people. And a particular highlight I wanted to mention is our graduate scheme, underway now, although of course we don't know the outcomes of that. That's going to take us several years. And our turnover now returning, as you mentioned earlier, Chair, into the normal range, which is pleasing. Despite the fact that we've recruited 120 people in the first 6 months of the year, and my colleagues have been alluding to that fairly constantly this morning, our time to hire is not where it needs to be. So in a typical normal year, we might recruit around 150 people. So we're almost at double the number. Time to hire remains problematic, and what we've hopefully done to address that is obviously to put more resources into it. So we've invested in our recruitment team. We're exploring a bit of outsourcing to bring time to hire fully under control. But the most important thing is there's more work to do here on talent acquisition. The strategic point is we need to make sure that we can attract and haul in, if you like, the very best talent. So that our talent acquisition strategy needs some work. We've also received funding to develop a new recruitment system, and that's useful because it will ease the burden on managers who, as you've heard earlier, are fairly busy and have to do recruitment alongside. So secondly, a second strategic objective, developing exceptional people and people leaders. Our approach to leadership, as you'll know, is two-pronged: a leadership development programme and the support and coaching of an experienced HR team to provide particularly support when things are not going so well. We're rightly proud of the success in internal promotions into management and leadership, and you've seen the data on that. And that work is supported by some refreshed workforce planning so that we can really note what future skills we're going to need and hopefully recognise and work our way towards those in advance rather than being reactive. But we recognise, again, in this section that there's a good deal more to do to embed career pathways and learning opportunities. We're delighted that we've had recent investment in a new learning management system, which over time will open up learning opportunities to everyone in the agency. On valuing diversity and promoting wellbeing and inclusion, we're rightly proud of our excellent wellbeing offer and our developing work on inclusion, and that includes the appointment of inclusion ambassadors. But there's a great deal more to do to create the diverse and culturally competent workforce that better reflects the patient population, and that's particularly true at senior levels in the agency. So we'll be looking closely at our people survey data and looking at looking for reductions in colleagues experiencing bullying and comparing the different demographics to help us to inform some practical change in this area. Investing in a healthy culture is our fourth objective, and I'd note this as the real one to watch. Those of us who have been working in large organisations will probably recognise Peter Drucker's alleged comment that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It really does. And post-transformation, organisations like ours are particularly vulnerable to unstable cultures as people find their feet. In response to that, we've refreshed our values, our behaviour framework, but there's much more to do to embed these, and our people survey, again, will give us the first indications of success and particularly give us a good indicator of where to aim our efforts for change. And finally, embedding great performance and delivery. An example of supporting our activities in this area are One Agency Learning Library, performance progress reviews, and increased focus on recognising performance and delivery from teams, and the flexibility that James just mentioned in response to concerns about clinical trials is a good indicator that we're beginning to be the kind of organisation that can flex and change as it needs to. So finally, from me, our people strategy is ambitious. Our line managers are busy, our HR team is stretched, and it was ever thus. So we're making good, solid, steady progress, and that's to be celebrated. We must ask ourselves, of course, is that enough? Do we need to plan a leap forward to truly fulfil our potential as an organisation? And again, our people survey will guide us in this and help us to determine the focus and timing of any change. So this strategy will rightly flex as we respond to what our people are telling us. I welcome questions and advice from the board.
Thank you for that really nice overview. That's very helpful. Questions? Go on, Mercy.
Liz, some of this is really good progress. So especially, I think, leaders walking the talk. When our target's 23 and actually, people are reporting. And I wonder if that's partly because we've got new people being inducted into the organisation. And so it is something to sort of keep an eye on. And of course, I've got to comment on the diversity targets and are exceeding some of those. But the important thing, as you say, is about retention, isn't it, really? And making sure that we make this a good place to work going forward as well. That just to make you aware that I'm the NED lead for equality, diversity, and inclusion for the MHRA board, and also that I work with other ALBs, non-exec directors and chairs of other ALBs and in health, and we often compare organisations. So this is kind of good data to also learn from other organisations what we can kind of do better and issues like that. So just to make you aware, because you're new into the organisation, but this is very encouraging. But it is about how do we continue to build this as well. So it's really more a comment about the way forward and how you feel that we can continue to keep people kind of involved in development of a better culture, really.
Thank you, and thank you for that advice about your own role, because I do think EDI is an area where we have quite a bit of work to do. So I'd welcome some help with that. The question, I suppose, is: are we satisfied with a steady creep, which we are experiencing, or are we in need of a leap? It's a creep or a leap question. I think our people survey is the best indicator to tell us whether we whether steady progress is where we need to be, or whether we need to do something more. So we'll receive that data in very early December, and I would not want to come to the board until I've had a good chance to analyse that, particularly the narrative comments from colleagues, which I can cut those narrative comments and understand what newer staff are saying compared to longer serving staff, for example. So until we've got that information, I think it would be foolish to allow my enthusiasm for a leap of change to overcome the slow, steady progress, because inevitably, if you're engaging people in cultural change, unfortunately, there's a finite amount of time, and they're not engaging in the core work for patients. So we must constantly look to achieve that balance. Hope that helps.
So I think we sense your appetite. So give us a sense of what a leap might look like.
Well,
hypothetically.
Hypothetically, in the EDI space, of course, it could really be about creating a culturally competent workforce. So really embedding allyship across our colleagues, so that people really understood different perspectives, even if we haven't got a fully representative workforce. That's a brilliant thing to do. It's a good thing to do in and of itself, but engaging 1,300 people in an allyship journey is an opportunity cost that we need to think about. So it's the pace of change, I suppose. So LEAP is really the organisation focusing on that change in rapid time rather than over the long term.
Yeah.
And of course, it doesn't mean, as we know in the NHS, where we have great diversity, doesn't actually mean that it's, there is equality within the system. And your point on senior levels of, diversity amongst senior staff as well is kind of noted, really. So it's about making progress on those things. I'm also, I don't know why I've got so many hats, but I'm also the Speaking Up champion for the MHRA as well. And so the bullying and harassment stuff, of course, is quite key too. So as we're going through this cultural change, that's another area that we really need to keep an eye on.
I agree. We're looking in the 9, 8, 7% people talking about having experienced bullying or harassment in the organisation in our current survey data. So I'm looking for a reduction there, but also with the benefit of the large sample size of the people survey, I can cut that data a little bit and understand who those people are, where they are in the organisation, where they are in the hierarchy of the organisation, for example. You wouldn't expect me to say anything other than 0 is the target for bullying and harassment in any sensible organisation. I would expect, comparing to the best other civil service organisations, I'm afraid there is a residual around about 4% that seems to be hard to shift. But I think we've got a little way to go to get to that. And having an effective Speak Out champion is really helpful to us. So thank you for wearing that hat.
It's a personal question. I saw a bit of data in another organisation recently who were using close to real-time feedback, that they do very, very short, regular feedback sessions. Do you think there's a role for that sort of slightly more rapid turnaround survey or not? I don't know.
We've also done some really helpful, we call them pulse surveys, to kind of take the temperature. I think very helpful, and some of the data you've got here is as a result of pulse surveys. There is nothing quite like the 750 odd 800 people that contribute to our people survey to give you real depth of data, though. So I'm a big fan of pulse surveys, and I know Rachel's team are too. But what I'm really looking forward to is the data that we'll get from the main people survey, because there's so much depth to it, and we should use it to guide our strategy. So our strategy is only as good as our last people survey, in my opinion.
Claire.
Yeah, a couple of things from me, please. So attract
Just
and
talk.
retain. Can you hear me okay?
Just if you lean in a bit.
My voice is so quiet. Attract and retain talent. So 2 things there. We talked about the graduate scheme, but obviously I'm always championing not just scientific professionals and medical professionals, but of course digital and technology. And there isn't really much of an offering, whether it's a graduate scheme or something different within MHRA for me. But what I am doing is a lot of work with other ALBs and counterparts in other agencies, but where I have the blockers is with MHRA. So we can't do these types of secondments, or we can't do these types of placements, and I get quotes such as we don't have the process or insurance. So the blockers actually, for me, with that collaboration outside of the agency or within the agency. So maybe that's something we can look at.
Yes, certainly. So thank you for that. civil service rules can sometimes be a kind of a blanket cover to decide not to either take risks or do some interesting work. So we need to look at those carefully. But clearly we're also civil servants, and we
operating within
need to
them, but
balance.
maybe to the boundaries. And I always talk about location. So while we're trying to attract and retain, wherever we limit ourselves to just two geographical locations, so straight away. Again, that's another sort of blocker. That's and will remain. And the only other point I had was around enabling great performance and delivery. And again, thinking back to whether it's pulse surveys, staff survey responses, and so on, I have recruited a lot of people over the last year. I think my record was 1 a week for a year. And obviously I have some great people who've worked here for a long time as well. And kind of I would say the number one sort of question, comment, groan is around why do we have to do it like this, or this process is broken, and so on. So I think there's so many ways that we can really make it a great place to work and for people to flourish by looking at some of those things that might not be in a people strategy, but really contribute to the way that we work and the environment in which we work to make everything leaner and more dynamic and a little bit risk averse, perhaps.
That's an interesting comment. I think that there's more to do as an organisation to trust our people and not to over-process them. So not to put too much process around, and again creating that balance. Coming back to another comment you made, Claire, about talent and being able to acquire the best talent. I think what we've become very good at is the recruitment flow, the ability to pop something out in civil service jobs and make that flow work, and that's a very good thing to be good at. We are good at it, and ramping up the numbers as you've seen. But there's something more important, I think, and that's about the talent acquisition piece, where you're going into the marketplace and spotting talent and bringing people into your domain. Clearly, they must go through the proper recruitment processes, as they rightly should, but a talent acquisition strategy, including for digital, but obviously for some of our specialist workforces, is going to be something that we need to work on, because we have a very different workforce makeup to many organisations, and it's a very talent-rich organisation, and we will need to use the likes of LinkedIn to go out and lure people in, tell them about our work, tell them about the brilliance that my colleagues have been talking about this morning, and attract people. We do not have the attraction of perhaps rather higher salaries and some academic institutions, the kudos related to some of those institutions, and we need to tell people about the kudos of working for MHRA, which I think that maybe in the desire to get people through the door we've not focused on. So I think that will be really important, and that includes for digital colleagues as well, not just for our medical and scientific colleagues.
Thank you. Yeah, other platforms are available. So a brief comment, I think you had Carly, then Raj, and I think Hader brief. I think probably that we'll see how we go, but we probably need to just do a couple more.
Thanks. Just quickly from me, we are nearly at the end of the third quarter in the year, and the data on page 83 about the use of in-year reward budgets is at 17% for delegated grades, and there's no end-of-year rewards for delegated grades now. Do you have any sense of whether that's bedding in as it should, bearing in mind it's still a relatively new switch away from the end-of-year process?
Just pop your mic on, Liz. Sorry.
Sorry. Yes, on reward budgets, we are actively pursuing this, and it's one of those things that takes a little bit of time for the organisation to kind of get used to doing. A really good organisation is using this as recognition, not reward. So, and associated with that is also the public recognition of work well done. I think that from my memory, and sorry, I should have the data in front of me, but from my memory, I don't think we're projecting to hit the full budget this year. But that's not for want of trying, and it's something that I'm very keen that we pursue. But I'll happily circulate a note about it, about where we are and where we think we're going to be at the end. I know someone sent me that, and I just can't bring it to hand, I'm afraid.
Thanks. Raj.
Just very quickly. Firstly, we're thrilled to have you. It's been a role that's been long needed for a while now in terms of people officers. Looking at where you are now, because you've come in new to this role, you touched on in terms of DEI as an area that we could potentially make a leap. What does your gut tell you in terms of anything of other areas beyond DEI? Is there anywhere else? Because I just think it'll be good insight to get from you, because you've come into this new, you're looking at it from a very different perspective. It'd be good for us to get some insight where you think that, well, there's a couple of other areas where initially, we'll wait for the survey results for sure, but we good to get that insight from you. And then the other piece is, while we work in making it a great place to work for employees, do we also in parallel have to think about how others outside the organization look at it? Because how they look at the agencies can be critical in terms of all our retention strategy, all of it. Is that a sequential approach, or would you, is there anything you can do? There's two questions, but you don't need to answer in depth. Just a quick insight would be great. Thank you.
On your second question, and promoting us as an employer in the marketplace, which obviously also promotes us as promoting an organisation as a great place to work is also about promoting an organisation. I think that that perhaps, as I said earlier, we've rather focused on processing people and not focused on that, and that's something that I think is a little bit of a missing link that we need to work on, particularly with our comms and stakeholder engagement colleagues. And these two things are inherently connected, fairly obviously. In terms of the areas that I, as a fresh pair of eyes, think that we ought to focus our efforts on, it's always culture. It's always the answer. I've been the director of many organisations in many sectors, and creating that culture of trust where your people are flexible because they want to be flexible, because they have passion for your organisation, and because they want to see achieved. That's always the ultimate goal. We're really lucky. We've got such a lot of the raw materials here. We've got a great workforce. We've got great communications with our workforce. We need to kind of work through that with people. Trust is key. If people trust the organisation they work for, not to put in silly rules that are unnecessary, that trust the organisation is communicating, it trusts their judgment. That has a fantastic impact on productivity. Much as I would like it to be a great place to work, because I would like to work in a great place to work, and I think probably quite a lot of us would declare an interest around here about that. That is not an end in itself. It has to be a great place to work that drives productivity and drives something for patients. And I think that's the balance we need to try to set.
Okay, thanks. And we have only a short slot. I think, sorry, Hader, and I think there's others with questions, but I think we'll give you a longer slot next time. So can I just clarify when you have the data from the survey and when you think you want to be able to process that and come back?
Well, we're told we'll have the data in early December. So I don't know whether that's going to be the full data. As I've noted earlier, the data I really like is the narratives rather than just the stats. So from memory of previous civil service surveys, I've not been a proper civil servant before, but from memory, I don't think you get the narrative data and the analysed data together. So I would have thought it would be something that the board might want to think about in maybe January, February time.
Great, that's a helpful steer. It maybe we've got a lot of things lining up for January, February, but it sounds like a good priority. Thank you for that. Thank you for the paper. We'll move on. We've got a couple more items before we have the public questions. So I think the next item's on safety, if I'm right. And we have a paper, I think, Mark, you're going to introduce the paper on the key priorities for MHRA's health and safety strategy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the agency had a health and safety strategy which ran from 2019 to 2024, which was a time of considerable change for the agency, and considerable work has been done on the health and safety systems. And we talked earlier about the better reporting of metrics and the like. It's now time to actually refresh that strategy going forward, and we're hoping that the board will approve that refresh idea, proposal, and also make suggestions. And with that, I'll hand over to the head of Health and Safety and Quality Assurance, Marie.
Marie, my apologies, I should have introduced you, but perhaps you'd just like to introduce yourself and then, yes, carry on. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this. So I'm Marie Donat-Antonio. I'm Deputy Director for Health and Safety across the agency and for Quality Assurance within Science, Research and Innovation. So just picking up from Mark's introduction, there's a really good opportunity to come here to talk about the strategy, because we are at the point of looking at a refresh. The strategy has run for just under it's in its fourth year, and we've in the last few years undergone many changes, some of those internal changes and the building of the new organisation, and the sort of outputs from that being like a new corporate plan, new people strategy, action plan, etc., which is a good opportunity to look at those and see how they feed into the new health and safety strategy. Also, there's been quite a few external influences that we need to take account of, both with from the pandemic to changes following the pandemic and increases in travel, new world threats that put some of our staff at more risk when they go to travel to these high-risk destinations. We've had, as you're aware, a lot of input from the Health and Safety Executive over the last couple of years, and we've sort of been able to develop some of our systems from that. And we're also working closely with other organisations such as UK HSA, and also I'm part of the UK Biosafety Leadership Group, and that gives an opportunity for sort of sharing best practice, but also sort of assessing where we are, with similar organisations. So the idea of the refresh is to not necessarily tear apart what we've got. We've had 7 strategic themes within the current strategy that we've been following. Underneath that, we have an action plan each year, and both are provided as appendices to the paper. So we pick up the main areas each year that we want to focus on within that action plan, and we monitor that. Because of the changes that I've talked about, what we're looking at is refreshing the current themes, and some of the key areas that I've listed in the paper. Pick up some of the sort of headings of that. We want to have a greater clarity on the leadership and management functions, and how that demonstrates commitment to staff, and how we develop that sort of leadership profile to ensure a sort of stronger and more robust management system, and also how we communicate that. We want a clearer focus on roles and responsibilities of staff related to health and safety activities. And this is very much something that's come through from not only the changes in the organisation, but also from HSE feedback in identifying safety critical roles and understanding sort of what they do, and so that they understand their role in the system. We want to also build more effective and proportionate risk management for health and safety, and to ensure legal compliance and the safety of staff. So that will be looking at the current risk management process, how we build that and embed that into our health and safety systems, and just making sure that's an integral part of the planning and the review process. Also looking at safety of staff and legal compliance related to our ageing infrastructure and facilities and equipment. That's something that we're working on a sort of programme, but some of the incidents that we're seeing, there's been sort of increase in reporting of those incidents, and a lot of those are around our infrastructure. So we're we're just sort of reviewing what that means in terms of our capital funding and our investment decisions and how that links to health and safety. And then finally, the final area we're looking to include is the collaborative working across the organisation and how we embed a positive health and safety culture. So developing that to understand the successful health and safety management, its collective responsibility, getting a clear understanding of the remit across that, especially between health and safety and human resources, and how we build the well-being programme into that, so that we understand where that joint working can sort of get the most benefit. And then in terms of streamlining activities, which we've already started, especially in the joint area that I now cover, which is with quality assurance, so that we can actually work together in areas like auditing and assessment, etc. So the main recommendation from this is really to ask the board to consider the proposed plan for this refresh, provide any comments on those areas for inclusion, or any areas that they think may need to be considered that we haven't looked at. It would be good to get input, potentially from two of these NEDs, maybe from ARAC, who will also sort of get probably sort of greater sight of some of the issues and the areas that we report on quarterly. We would suggest the final drafting, although it goes through our health and safety strategy group, and we will use that group to develop the new strategy. It would be good to probably have it signed off by the board. And then once it's issued, we would report on that through our annual reporting cycle. So I'll leave it there for any
Great,
questions.
thank you. I mean, there's a lot of important things in there. So comments, please. Go on, Amanda.
Thanks very much, Maria. And I think we've really seen the profile raised of health and safety over the past 12 months. And I think that's very important given the work we do, particularly with the oversight from ARAC. So I really appreciate the work that's put in. I think this is quite comprehensive, and I think that's good. It seems to have gone beyond South MIMS, which was its initial focus, and recognising the particularly the health and safety issues with inspectors and the geopolitical position too. I was wondering if it's still a little bit, we could be a little bit stronger, particularly with regards getting health and safety as clear accountabilities for everybody. It comes back to what Liz, you were saying about culture and that taking ownership of that, and particularly roles and responsibilities. And I know we've talked a lot about the health and safety experts sometimes doing this in spare time. So I think the recognition by leadership of this as an important part of the way the agency operates is important, and embedding also in people's targets. And I think I'd like to get a better idea of what resources are required and whether we do have sufficient resources. So in the same way as we talked about having sufficient for clinical trials on an ongoing basis, and the same for HQ&A, do we have sufficient resources and expertise to sustain both our very statutory responsibilities with SAPO4, with health and safety in the higher risk biological areas, but also to our staff and the activities we do. And I would like to see that a little bit more obvious. I can't really tell from here. And so whether we've got that culture really built into everything we do or not. Sorry, that's a bit of a rambly question.
But it's an important point about embedding this and recognising the real time required to do it properly. Other comments? I mean, yeah, Hayden.
Thanks, Marie. In terms of your first question, the only thing I thought on initial review was missing was something around mental health, but I think that's picked up in the well-being, equality, diversity and well-being program. So I was just wondering how the two overlapped and kind of supported each other. I think that'd be an interesting aspect to look at, just to make sure we've not missed anything else out of the two.
Yeah, so I'll just respond on that. I mean, that is an area, as I say, I think we need to understand the remits at the moment between health and safety and sort of human resources, because it is an area that we work closely together, and it's an area that certainly the HSE are building on in terms of well-being. So there is very much a health and safety focus, but equally there's an HR focus. So we need to understand that better. So the point in the paper, is that there needs to be something in the strategy around it. We need to unpick that a little bit and understand how. I'll be working with Liz and her team in terms of, how will that develop and what does that need to then be in our strategy. So. Okay.
Michael, did you want to come in or?
No.
Sorry.
No, I was really going to echo what Mandy said. It needs to be appropriate resourced, and I think the other lens that you need to look at through is the lens of resilience. If you get health and safety right, your organisation will be more resilient, and I sometimes wonder about whether we ought to be asking that question of ourselves, because we learn by mistakes, but I think we reduce resources in health and safety as part of the initial stages of transformation, and I didn't think we always realised the consequences of that, and it did have an impact on resilience, and we're now having to backtrack a bit, so I think that's important going forward.
Okay. Yeah, Julian.
Just a question from myself in terms of early warning and early reporting. Just wondered if you could illustrate, because it didn't really come out to me exactly, how we look at, for example, the birds triangle approach. So early demonstration of low-level events that will prevent higher-level accidents and incidents, and just really how we are getting to those things before they become into a major issue.
Yep, that's a good question. What we're doing, I mean, there is reporting through our safety organiser system, and we are trying to make sure that everyone is aware of the need to report. Incidents, we have seen a big increase in reporting of incidents because there has been a push to look at obtaining trends, getting those early warning signals. So with the new sort of coverage of safety champions across the agency, we'll be promoting that a lot more so that everybody understands how that feeds in. What we're seeing now is we are starting to trend some of the incidents that are being reported. We're seeing patterns, and we're starting to see, particularly at the moment in the infrastructure side of things, we're seeing the early warning signs of failing parts of the building because we're getting, several steam leaks, for example. So we're seeing the same sort of root cause. So we want to start sort of really developing that and that understanding across the agency so that we can really get those early warning signs. So there'll be a lot more promotion of through the safety champions to make sure that everybody is aware of the need to report incidents as well as accidents.
Yeah, you're talking to a man used to run a chemical factory, so do you want to come back, Jim?
Yeah, no, that's where I work. That's where I worked, obviously, for quite a number of years, and I guess it's really maybe also the terminology could be slightly changed to enable people to report. So things like in my past, it's near misses. Yeah. So it's kind of looking at it. So incident kind of gives you a lie that something actually has happened, but it's how do you kind of get those, or a good catch, or a different phrase that you could then really be looking at, because it gives a different flavour, because incident and accident kind of says something has happened or an event has happened, but it's what would have prevented that if you'd have caught it earlier.
I mean, is it a very simple reporting process for members of staff? I don't know how you do it. If you notice something that you want to report in the hospital, we have a very well-established, quick process.
Yeah, I mean it's fairly quick if you know how to use Safety Organiser. There is the process, though, in terms of the safety champions putting it onto Safety Organiser for those who either don't have access or aren't trained to use it. I think so. It is straightforward, and we're making sure that everybody knows that it's a very quick process. Just coming back to Julian's comment. Fun enough, the terminology has changed over the years because we prefer near miss because it does sort of trigger something in people's minds that they realise that it's something that could have happened, which is the HSE definition of an incident. But I think we refer to both in some of our documentation. But I agree. I think it sort of loses that idea in people's minds that they should be reporting something that could have happened. So we'll look at that.
Okay. That's helpful. I mean, I wonder if we do need a system that doesn't require too much training, but that's a question maybe you could think about. So thank you for that. I think you've sort of brought this as an early site for us, if I understand, and I think one of your questions was whether, as a board, we want to see this and sign off the strategy, and I think I would assume that there is support for that. I'm getting a lot of nods, so yes, that definitely would be the case. I don't know when you think you might want to do that, roughly.
I'm aiming for, well, probably mid next year. I'm sort of writing it the early part of next year, so probably ready to come here.
Yeah, new financial year. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll come. Yeah, that's very helpful. You had a specific question about ARAC. I won't put our ARAC NEDs on the spot because they're pretty busy, but I'm sure there'd be interest for NEDs to engage. So please do reach out to them. And I think if the ARAC NEDs feel able to input particularly, I think they do have important insight of things that would be useful. Was there anything else specifically you were asking us? Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. That was very helpful, and it's good to see this at the board. So then I think we just move to our updates from, first of all, ARAC. Michael?
Yeah, very quickly. So we met two months ago. We have our next normal meeting on the 1st of December. I think the boards that have followed September have covered a lot of the issues, health and safety. On financial performance, I'm sure Rose would expect me to say this, is that the position looks good at the moment, but there is still quite a lot of ground to cover if we're going to spend the money, particularly around capital. And I would emphasise the point that we live within an annual financial regime. If we don't spend the money, we lose it, and we need to be very careful as well about capital spend going forward. People will be aware that last year Internal Audit awarded the organisation limited assurance around its control environment. I'm really positive the way in which the executive, in particular June and Carly and Rose, are taking this forward to move us out of limited assurance. Other organisations have been in this position. I know, talking to the chair of the Audit Committee of the Department of Health, they were in the same place a couple of years ago, but we do need to continue to focus on that, and that's a two-way process, making sure that Internal Audit deliver when they should deliver, but equally making sure that the organisation responds appropriately to Internal Audit and facilitates that work. And I was very pleased to attend a meeting, I'm probably going to get the terminology wrong, of the executive group, where we had quite a good discussion, I think, around the role of Internal Audit and particularly executive colleagues' responsibility for making sure that that programme is delivered. On particular reports that we considered at the last committee, the only one I bring to attention is cyber. I'm grateful to Claire, because Claire advanced that work, and I will emphasise that, so that we had it early, but it did award limited assurance. There is more work to be done in that space. Claire is aware of that, but I think as a board we need to return to that. It is on the risk register, but we need to actually, I mean, we're not unlike any other organisation, but the cyber risk is increasingly growing, and we need to be alert to that. And the only other thing that I'd say is I was very grateful to ARAC colleagues and board colleagues, and also Mercy, because we had our annual risk horizon scanning meeting a couple of weeks ago. So that was both internal and external, and we were lucky to secure the attendance of the Deputy Chair of NICE, the Chair of the Audit Committee from the Health Security Agency, and the Chair of the Department of Health Audit Committee, and I know Catherine attended as well. And I thought that was a very good discussion, early days, but what we tried to do was look at the system of getting a medical device from initiation or medicine or a combination of both, from initial initiation to the patient. What is our respective roles? And it was designed to ensure a better understanding of mutual risks and how we manage them. Now, have we solved it? No, we haven't. But I do think it was good to demonstrate that we are talking to one another on these issues, and I know that happens at Chief Executive Chair level, but we need to make sure that that happens throughout all of our organisations and look at it through different lenses. And the lens of risk and how we manage risk in the system is really important going forward. And we'll be looking to see how we build on that for the future. I think that's all I'll say, unless my colleagues have got anything else they'd like to add.
That's helpful, Michael. And maybe, I don't know, Carly, do you want to come back, or Rose, on any of those issues raised?
I need to thank Michael very much for chairing the Horizon Scanning meeting. I think there was quite a lot that came out both in that cross-system risk discussion and then in terms of how we use our own internal risk register even more effectively. So I'm very grateful for everyone's support in that.
Thank you.
And on the finance issue, I agree. We do need, as an organisation, to get better at planning our spend and ensuring that it is done in year. And we will be bringing back another finance report to ARAC in December to show progress on that.
Great. So thank you, Michael, and for the committee. That's very helpful. Amanda, ODRC?
Yes, I will be very brief. We covered a lot of the items, I think, that have been covered in the board today at our last meeting, which was the end of September. I think it's great to have Liz on board, and I can give assurance to the board that our processes are really robust in terms of our strategy for people or culture or EDI. Our implementation is the key, and I think that's where we've continued to stress and looking for wins in those different areas. I think we also are discussing about processes, which has been quite a challenge for ODRC to try and work with and improve processes, encourage the improvement of processes in the 4 key areas. Obviously, we've had a crisis with clinical trials, and I think maybe that's a wake-up call for getting the improvements going forward across the other areas, and the importance of processes to help us design new systems, improve our culture, and this isn't an academic exercise. So I think that message is coming through, so which is good. We've made a big stress on individual performance targets for people, cascading through from the corporate and business plans. I see in Liz's numbers we've got 80%, which is better than maybe we had, but that's still an important tool which I don't think we're using sufficiently. But I think encouraging, particularly, and we saw that from the performance report which Rose presented, and we talked a lot about targets around that, and it's good to see the progress that's been made in terms of setting those, start with the statutory targets and how we're working against that. So I think small steps going forward. We've now got to just coalesce all of that together to make an impact for all of our staff.
Thank you. Any comments? Questions, Michael? Is that a light on for historical light? It's like a legacy hand equivalent, isn't it? Is there anything further in terms of embedding some of the things we've talked about, health and safety and so forth, in that the committee needs to be looking at, do you think, or can we manage that elsewhere?
I think we need to use certain tools that things like making it easy to report, having health and safety targets within people's personal objectives, which encourages leaders to do that. Looking at the way governance and decision making works together with your personal and corporate responsibilities in terms of what people are doing, and there is certain learning that comes up from real experience, and some of that has come up through the clinical trials, how we then embed that in the changes you're making, and working out. So it is about collaboration and walking the talk, really.
Great, thank you. I'm mindful June is probably prepping for a meeting, but June, before we go to the public questions, I don't know if there's anything you want to reflect on, either from that or previous items that you want to emphasise.
Well, thank you, Graham. Really helpful discussion across the piece, and keeping a strong watch on some of the action points that we're taking forward, which shows the benefit of the level of interaction we're having at the board. Really important that we come back to the clinical trials questions around the future operating model and the digital infrastructure that supports that. I think it's great to have the conversation around the people strategy. And again, great to have Liz on board. And health and safety, the amount of resource that goes into that needs revisiting, as you've said. So a lot to take away there. But I think overall, on the case, been no main surprises, I don't think, but lots more to keep progressing.
Good. We don't want too many surprises. That's great. Lovely, thank you. So over to Rachel. So I think we have some questions submitted and possibly one that will be asked in person, but maybe if I could just pass to you to coordinate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. All the questions are going to be asked by me this morning, so it's a mix of pre-submitted questions and ones that have been asked through the meeting that relate to topics on the agenda. So the first one is about evaluation of the pilot project involving patients in the ILAP process and how that experience is being translated into wider practice within the agency.
Mark, and I think that's with you, is that?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. I believe it comes from one of the patient groups who have been very actively involved in ILAP, and I would like to thank all of those patients who are represented for their keen involvement. So ILAP has been very much driven by patient input, and the patients sit on the various steering committees in making the decisions, and that has been very well recognised and valued by the applicants, and we've seen that from feedback on the applications as well. So there's very good learning there. We are applying it directly to IDAP, the devices pathway, which is in pilot phase. So some of the learnings have been directly put into that. There's the wider work of the agency through the PPSE team, which is looking to see how those learnings can be taken more widely. So it's been a very successful pilot. We hope to continue to work with the patients to improve ILAP going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So if we move on to the next one, which was also pre-submitted, and I think this is one for Liz. So the question is, does the board feel that there's now an adequate workforce to sufficiently deliver on existing guidance and ensure the organisation is future-proofed against future shocks to the system?
Just pop your mic.
I think we're getting there. In the first 6 months, as I've mentioned, of this year, we welcomed 120 new people. A typical year, we'd look to recruit 150 people. We've got 50 jobs advertised in October alone, and I think we've demonstrated a great deal of flexibility in the work that James has just described in deploying people to the places we need them. We've now also got a decent workforce planning system in regular use. More work to do on that. I think it's impossible to completely future-proof any organisation, but I am confident that we are now developing our monitoring, particularly our planning, our overall capacity, and that flexibility. And I think that will enable us to keep ahead of the curve, and as part of our vision to be a world-leading regulator.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. There's then a couple of questions on clinical trials. So I'll look at Mark again. So if I do them separately, Mark, that's probably more straightforward. So the first one is asking, can the board give a timeline for industry on the implementation of the new clinical trials regulatory system?
Certainly, thank you very much. The The new clinical trials regulatory system comes from the results of the public consultation that were published in March 23, and also considerable discussions with industry through the clinical trials backlog thing. So we've got a good amount of information. That drafting is in process by people in Glenn's team, and I believe it's scheduled for completion around about March 24. However, with any legislation, it's subject to parliamentary timetable, so that date may change.
Thanks. Did you want to add anything on that, Glenn? Are you happy?
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let's do the other clinical trials question then. So the question that's been asked is how many clinical trials are stopped from progressing?
Okay, so the agency doesn't have a clear answer on that one. What we do know is that it's up to the clinical trial sponsor whether they stop a clinical trial or whether they pause a clinical trial. And these can be for a whole range of entirely legitimate reasons. We don't collect that data, so we can't comment on those reasons. What we do know is what happens with authorizations. Where we receive an application, we generally ask it to go back for further additional, or maybe say it's not suitable, in less than 3% of the cases. So I'm afraid we can't fully answer the person's question, but hopefully that helps.
Do we think that's a question we should be able to answer? Does it?
I think it's for the wider ecosystem, Chair. I believe it's something that the O'Shaughnessy recommendation is trying to get an idea on, because it captures things like patient recruitment, but also setting up as centres of clinical trials, other aspects which are beyond the actual regulatory request often.
And presumably if it was stopped for safety reasons, we would know about
that. We would know. Sorry, just to be absolutely
Yeah.
clear, if there's a safety reason, that would be reported.
Okay. That's helpful.
Okay, thank you. And the final question goes back to the health and safety item. So the questioner has asked how many whole-time positions currently have a health and safety remit, and how are the number of people in that area kept under review?
May I pass that over to Marie?
Yes, thank you. In terms of the actual team, we have 6 full-time equivalents for the agency sort of managing health and safety. The number of full-time equivalents which are sort of added up from other people's roles, I don't have the number for that at the moment, because, as we've said before, people have parts of their role that support health and safety, you know, and some have more than others. So, you know, there are specifics, like things like the biological safety officer and certain sort of champion roles, but we'd have to add up the proportion of that. But because we are looking at the way that people are recognised in terms of the work that they cover for health and safety and what the resource requirements are, we will start to look at the proportion of their time that is dedicated to health and safety.
Great, thank you. So I guess the question is picking up on that conversation we had about the importance of that resourcing in your plans that you bring back. So thank you.
Okay, so that concludes the questions this morning. There are a couple which I think require quite detailed numerical answers, so we'll answer those in writing after the meeting.
Thank you. So I think that concludes the morning meeting. So thank you to all those who attended online in particular, and for those who've engaged and asked questions, that's very helpful. And those online, including our staff and those in industry and so forth. And thank you to everybody who's put in the work to prepare the papers today. It's been extremely useful. And before we leave, just to remind everybody about the purpose of the MHRA is to protect and improve health. We're continuing to do that by enabling scientific innovation, by accelerating patient access to new products, and by strengthening our patient and safety surveillance systems. So with that in mind, we'll close the meeting, and thank you all. Have a good day.